you have to watch a bit, like when he speaks, like if the red thing comes up, then turn it down here at the record level.
Okay.
Does anybody put out a question?
Same in the USA. It's guaranteed to make the mind go quiet. Any questions? Yes.
Have you some recommendation if people like to go in the West, because we are all trained here in Thailand, so in West people are different, so what kind of qualities we should develop for doing this?
Most people were born in the West, so you've got some kind of acquaintance with getting by and communicating with others. One of the early things that, when I first arrived in England, one of the early teachings that Ajahn Sumedho gave to me was when I was just newly arrived at Chithurst in England, and I had to go to. We all just had rooms in the big old Victorian house there, and I was asked to go and check something with him, and I've knocked on the door of his room at Chithurst House and went in, and Luang Por was just sort of sitting there meditating on this little low dian that he had, and I said, terribly sorry, Ajahn, but I was asked to come and ask you about something, and he said that's fine. Yeah. Adaptability is the key. I was apologizing for disturbing him, but that was his response. He was just absolutely unbothered and just smiled and said, yeah, adaptability is the key. That's really the spirit for going to the West. And you can be anxious and what about if this happens or that happens, or what am I going to do with this or that situation, and the mind can create all sorts of anxieties and worries of how it might be. But if you basically have a sense of being attentive and being ready to adapt, being people who don't know what a Buddhist monk is or don't know what you are, and then taking that into account and just developing that sense of flexibility in yourself, then you know what the Vinaya is, and you have your sense of respect and responsibility towards keeping the Vinaya, but also you're talking to some person, or you're in some situation where you realize this person hasn't got a clue what I am wearing this brown sheet for, or what I'm supposed to be representing. So, how can I best communicate, or what's the best way to handle this? So that if you're coming from a place of anxiety, fear of things not being done right, or fear of getting things wrong, then there'll always be that sense of tension, and it'll always be difficult, and you'll feel a quality of pressure. So it becomes a bit of a burden. But if you have more of a sense of trusting your own mindfulness and your own commitment to Vinaya, and then but then holding that within a spirit of adaptability, and then you find that you can work with most situations. So that if you're going to the West, or going to countries that are like going to Philippines, where they probably wouldn't know what a Buddhist monk is there either. Just a sense of cultivating your own integrity, your own commitment to your training, and then a sense of mindfulness and wisdom, satipanya, sati sampajanya, and getting interested in being in a strange situation rather than intimidated. Because we can choose between being threatened and just being interested. Like, oh, well, I didn't expect this. What do I do with this one? And then, also the basic advice of, if the mind, if there's some prospect of going back to the West, like visiting family in Germany or wherever, the mind can get really motoring with papancha about what's going to happen, and my sister has this opinion, and what's going to happen when I meet my father, and we can create all these scripts for the future. But and when I was a young monk, my mind used to do that all the time. But I noticed after about 6 years of being in robes and practicing meditation, something in me noticed that not one single time had anybody ever followed my script. No matter how clearly I had it figured out what was going to happen or how I was going to react, no one ever, it never went that way. And something just sort of dropped it. So it's natural enough for those kind of projections into the future, the mind creating stories about what's going to happen and how good this will be or how bad that will be, or fear about how to work with different situations. But just recognizing, well, right now, this is papancha. That much I know. This is just the mind caught up in prungdang. That's what's happening now. And then just recognizing that's the feeling, that's what the mind is doing, and just recollecting anakkot meine, the future's uncertain. And to just let that, not try to fill the mind up with preparation, but just cultivate the intention to be mindful, to have sampajanya, and to be to trust in your own practice of Dhamma Vinaya. That's what comes to mind anyway.
Teaching Buddhism in West, what was the biggest challenge that you had to face?
And knowing when to stop talking. Yeah, I don't think there's not much of a challenge in terms. People are very interested, and so that the motivation for people in the West for coming close to the monastery or coming along to talks is because they are interested. You don't have to convince people. So they've already got a lot of motivation. Mostly the motivation is dukkha. They're not coming because generally their parents have dragged them along, or they're expected to show up. Maybe to a certain extent with the Asian immigrant community, but even for the Asian community, the interest is often how to apply Buddhist teachings, and so that's why they come to a meditation monastery or monastery of foreign monastics rather than to their own Sri Lankan temple or Thai temple. They're coming to the Farang monastery because they have a sense of, well, this is a place where I can learn meditation, or it's not just fulfilling a particular custom. So because there is that basic interest and a curiosity that's there in people, that's a very natural and easy source for giving teachings. You don't have to persuade anybody or convince people a lot about how worthy sort of the Dhamma perspective is. Because people want to understand, they want to change themselves, they want to make sense of their lives. So teaching in the West is very easy in that respect, and they don't have much in the way of superstitions. They're not coming to the monastery because they want to be reborn in heaven. It just doesn't happen. Most of them have they have no particular sense of past lives or future lives, and they're not interested in that dimension at all. So, in that respect, it's probably a lot easier teaching Dhamma in the West than it is in Thailand. I don't know how those of you who teach here a lot find it.
Actually, we don't teach people, we don't have that kind of concept so much. It's a bit like people come here as well, just like the same way. They know Ajahn particular wisdom ways that follow.
Very good. Yeah, one of the things is also that people don't have an automatic respect for monastic form, and so sometimes it will be like, well, I'm interested in meditation, but I don't know why you guys want to dress like that. I don't really... You got some kind of a clothing fetish. I mean, that's not quite that bad, but it's you much more have to earn people's respect rather than assume it, which is also not a bad thing. There's no kind of automatic reverence or sense of that you're embodying something useful or good, and so that for many people you have to. That has to be something that grows within them to see that the usefulness of renunciation or the monastic tradition and form is something that has meaning and is beneficial. That's certainly not something that's automatic. Because mostly in the West most people in the West would never have met any kind of monastic apart from people who've been to maybe a Catholic school where they were taught by Catholic nuns. But even nowadays, the current generation, that the nuns wouldn't have been wearing robes, they would just be in ordinary clothes. So the whole role of monasticism doesn't really have much of a place in the average Westerner's consciousness. I think before I came to Wat Nanachad, I'd met one monk in my life, like a Franciscan monk who came to visit my school one day. That was the only monastic I'd ever met up to the age of 21.
Situations you've been in, probably generally like living here or in England or the States, does anything stand out as having been particularly conducive to your practice? Questions.
That's a good question. What's most conducive to the practice? Well, it's tricky because there's many different dimensions to the practice. Sometimes it's what's most conducive to, like, the formal meditation, and developing that aspect of samatha and vipassana. And so things like doing a 3-month retreat in the forest in Chithurst, or say our winter retreats at Abhayagiri and other branch monasteries. Those are really, really ideal situations. I don't know if you can get anything kind of better than that.
Do you still find that situation useful for that particular area of the practice?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But that's not the whole of the practice, and so it's also things like that you might not have thought about at first. Because sometimes you might find that you're very at home with the meditation, and you're very comfortable with your life as a monk, and your first few years of monastic life. This is great, and things are kind of in good shape. And then suddenly you're being asked to take responsibility, and people are looking to you for advice. Suddenly, they're calling you Ajahn, or you're being asked to lead retreats, or be the work monk, or something. And then a whole different other. Has this just happened? Oh, there you go, right.
Very good.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. But suddenly, and then that can be a whole different set of challenges that you didn't even know were there. So that can be the useful thing, is that So on the level of formal practice, I found those solitary retreat times and focused retreat times can be incredibly helpful. But also the learning how to take responsibility skillfully. You develop a lot of wisdom, and having to work with people and situations. It's like when, like in the early days at Chittas, I remember back in, I think it was 1981, when Luang Por Sumedho had been back to visit Thailand for the first time since he'd come to England, and he came back from that visit, and he said how when he came to Wat Pah Pong, he was talking with Luang Por Chah and said, and Luang Por said, well, how are things going at Chitta? He said, oh, it's incredible. We have this really committed group of monks. I've never lived with such a harmonious and focused and motivated group, and the nuns are very inspired and helpful, and the lay people are really interested in Dhamma, and it's extraordinarily kind of harmonious and energetic and committed community. It's marvelous. I never lived in such a positive situation. And then Luang Por just grunted and said, well, you won't develop a lot of wisdom living with that bunch. He wasn't the slightest bit impressed of how harmonious and good and inspired everybody was. Because he saw that wisdom comes from having to work with friction. I mean, of course, a few people did show up, and a few other characters floated in and other events unfolded that made it more challenging. So that having to, not just in the formal practice where you're learning to let go of being a person, being of Sakkaya Ditthi and self-view, and you're learning to calm the mind and let go of the five khandhas and not identify with them. That's one side of it. But then the other element of having to take responsibility and lead or deal with the five khandhas and let go of them whilst you're working with them and engaged with people and things, and then especially things that don't fit, difficult people, labour-saving devices that won't obey you. Water pipes that have been laid out in a system that defies logic and gravity and reason, and so that being ready to see that those are important sources of wisdom, so that both of those dimensions are helpful, and so that and in that respect, I think community life, for the second part of it, is really an important element. And that living in community and so taking responsibility within community, it can tend to be looked down upon as an annoying necessity that you really prefer to do without it, or you have to kind of tolerate it grudgingly. But that's not. Luang Por Chah was very insistent on it, and that's not an obstruction. That's what you learn from, and that's how you sharpen your wisdom sword. So that both of those sides I found very helpful. But also I think the retreat situation in the West, and I don't know how it is in Thailand, but it's for having like solo retreat time. But that's certainly a making time for that, where you really have a minimum of duties, and you can just have an extraordinarily simple routine. You really minimize the range of activity. Is incredibly helpful. And Pujom Kong as well. Yeah, those are great situations.
Neuroscientists seem to be
Well, I'm a little bit familiar with the sort of neuroscientist idea that a consciousness is an emergent, what they call it, an emergent property. That it's because of the chemistry of the brain and neurons that the consciousness arises as an effect of that. But to me, it's more like it seems to work more like a radio rather than as a generator. A radio doesn't produce the content of the radio stations, but without the radio you can't hear what the stations are broadcasting. And so that certainly our neurochemistry is, and the things that support consciousness as a human being in the human form, you need to have all the kit in the right order for that to work. But it's not the generator of the content. It's more like the means whereby the range of aspects of Dhamma and the universe is experienced. Certainly, the nature of the radio is going to affect what you hear, whether it's a tinny sound or a clear sound, or how many stations you can tune into. And but it's like the brain is not the creator of the Dhamma. So it's more like, but it's what our physical life, these five khandhas are what enable the Dhamma to be realized. It's like the means through which. So to me it works like that. I don't think about it a huge amount, but and I know there's a certain movement that says that the even sort of transcendent experiences, or what we think of as the realization of transcendent or timeless qualities, that these are just sort of mental effects, like looking for the God spot in the brain and such like that. Just put an electrode into the right cluster of brain cells and you can have a mystical experience and realize ultimate reality. I think there's a little bit of a bias, sort of a neuroscientist bias, that's sort of trying to put the religions in there. Meanwhile, the religious people are saying, how dare you? God is the creator of the universe. But that, as a model, that seems to be much more how it works, and also just experientially. That to consider the Dhamma as an artifact of neurochemistry seems a little bit presumptuous, and just doesn't fit with not only the Buddha's teachings, but also the reality of experience. But if you want to rationalize it, the neuroscientists say, you see, that's you feel that it doesn't, that it couldn't be that way. But actually, even that feeling is just another artifact of your neurochemistry. And they can, if they want to hold on to that opinion, they're totally welcome to. But I think it's always more important to see that it's clinging. Really, the fundamental meditation object is dukkha, and the ending of dukkha. And so that even if you've got a model that you think is right, you're saying, okay, the brain and the five khandhas of the body and mind, these are just the means by which the Dhamma is realized, rather than the generating any kind of just sort of being the sole source of consciousness and all experience. Even if you cling to that idea, like the Buddha is saying, if you use a raft to get across to the other shore, but you don't carry the raft around. So even if you feel you've got a model or a mental picture that fits, and that it respects the Dhamma teachings and fits with that perfectly, if you cling to that and say, this is right, the neuroscientists are wrong, and you pick up your rightness and then use it as a club to take a position to attack the materialists, then it's like Lumpur Cha would say, you're right in fact but wrong in Dhamma. It's a true fact, but you're handling it in a way that is not in accordance with Dhamma. You're not practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. You're practicing Dhamma in accordance with your own opinion. So that's always the important element, is not just getting a reliable or true concept or a genuinely a concept that's in accord with Dhamma, but it's also always how it's picked up and held. That's the key piece to it. Because even if what is being clung to is Dhamma, that very clinging causes dukkha. And so then that's why I'd say, dukkha, and the ending of dukkha is a basic meditation object, because if there's something that we read in the teachings or a concept like I was just describing that we think, yeah, that's right, that's it, that makes sense, then to see, well, how's that being held, or now do I feel I have to defend that against attackers, or now I'm feeling, yes, now I can I got the answer and I can set my idiot brother straight. Yeah. And that right there's dukkha. We're creating dukkha by the way that we're holding it, and that so that that quality of investigation and reflection. Okay, how is this being picked up? Is there? Okay, this seems to fit and seems to be true. Now, how is this being held? How can there not be? How can this not be a source for creating dukkha? How can this not be clung to? So that then you're using the forms and concepts and ideas that are accurate, but also they're conducing to liberation, rather than just being another source for sakaya ditthi and creating more discord, dukkha within oneself.
Supportive factors, antidotes against this road.
Patience and right view. Next question. No, I think I'm not trying to be flippant, but that's the haute tone. That's the flavour of the Dhutanga life. Really, is the capacity to endure patiently. And endurance, patience is not true patience. Khanti, which is a paramita, is not patience where you're waiting for something to be over. If you're waiting for the dukkha to stop, you're not being patient. There isn't real patience. That's just tolerating. So the true patience, which is a paramita, is not clinging to, as like a non-clinging to time, as a letting go of time. And so, like I was saying this morning, that little Avada about becoming. If your bhikkhu life is always dependent on what you're becoming or what you're getting away from, then sooner or later you'll be getting away from your jiwan. Because it's not just that we're not becoming a bhikkhu in order to be a bhikkhu. It's like it's not for a purpose of becoming. It's not in order to be a monk or to be a yogi or to be an arahant. It's as a kind of project. You're not projecting yourself into that thing, but it's a means of relinquishment. And so that then that patience, which lets go of time, so that maybe you're feeling frustrated or feeling unfulfilled, or you're feeling in a difficult situation, but the patience which sometimes all you can do is just grit your teeth and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, but ideally what you're working towards is like a really profound patience, which is a profound letting go of there is no future. Like one of Lumpur's, Lumpur Cha was brilliant at these little snappy phrases that encompass a lot. And he said one of those that he said is like, a samana is one who has no future. Samana pen pu mimi anakot. So to the worldly mind, having no future is a disaster. It's the sort of thing our parents dread to hear. Like, there's no future in this. You say, yes! Right! Isn't that wonderful? You could have had a great future. Yes, I could, but I haven't got one now. Isn't that great? So to the worldly mind, that's a disaster. But in terms of Dhamma, that's incredibly helpful. So that, and it's not just a kind of a giving up in terms of weakness or just a negativity or just switching off, which is really vibhava tanha. It's not just, okay, I give up, and then calling it endurance or calling it patience. But actually what you've done is you just tried to switch off and not feel. But true patience is a brightness. There's a kanti is a brightness to it. And so it's really that patience which is held within right view. You know, it's like, and that's really what keeps us in robes. Because if we're just staying in robes because we feel we should do, or we're just gritting our teeth, it's miserable for you, and it's certainly miserable for everyone you live with. Right? And this goes across traditions, whether you're a Hindu monk or a Christian monk or none. Everybody has the same experience. If there's a Christian monk who really doesn't want to be there in the monastery, everybody knows, and it's that the mood, the aramana, affects everyone. So it's not just a matter of staying in robes by force of will, but that sense of patience and finding that place of letting go within ourselves. It says, if there's no future, then is this bearable right now? And then even if the mind is saying, I can't bear it, I can't bear it, I can't bear it. As Luang Por Sumedho often says, even while you're saying, I can't bear it, you're actually bearing it. Right? It's just the mind going, oh no, I can't stand it. Oh no, like when you're in some sitting meditation and you sneak a look at your watch and think, what? It's only 20 past, it can't be. No. And that just to see that kind of feeling that doesn't want to tolerate that or that is whimpering. Poor me. Why do I do this to myself? And then just hearing that, and then just finding that place that can just let go of that. To say, yeah, that's the sound of the whimpering mind. That's what it feels like. And you find that you can be with that feeling and just not be dragged around by it.
What about the right view? What kind of, like, more like right attitude or right grasp of the teaching?
What, obedience to the abbot? If you always do what the abbot wants, then you'll be happy. Well, it's interesting that the Latin obedience comes, I'm told, comes from the Latin ob audiens, which means to be completely listening. Ob audiens. Yeah? Yeah, to be like a savaka, one who's listening. And that's in a way listening to the Dhamma of the situation. That obedience is like an obedience to Dhamma. To listen, okay, I really don't want this. This is exactly what I want to get away from. And then, this is the feeling of being with what I really, really don't want. And then that recognition of this is a feeling, then in that recognition, that's in a way the establishment of right view, saying, oh yeah, this is dukkha. Because in right view is often said, seeing the Four Noble Truths, but it's not just understanding the concept, but it's in that moment saying, oh yeah, idang dukkhang, this is dukkha. And then in recognizing that, then there's also in that recognition, there's the recognition, oh, this is an arisen thing. This is a thing, it's a sankhara, it has arisen. It's in a state of change, it's not a permanent and absolute quality. And that's not an idea, it's something that's being recognized at that moment. So that even though it's painful and it's really bitter and difficult, there's something that is not woven into that. It's not kind of totally meshed with it. It's like there's something that's saying, this is really horrible. This is exactly what I don't like. And so that right view is in the is using that capacity to find that there's always space around and within any kind of formation, mental formation, any kind of feeling. Because what is wrong view, or the micchaditthi is always, or the habits of ignorance is, there is this is real, either something that's desirable and good, like a pleasant experience, being praised, or having some delicious food, or some kind of painful feeling ending. This is great. The mind that says, this is great, but then avijja is where it's saying, that's an absolute value. This is absolutely good. That's avijja. When there's vijja, there's a recognition of this is a feeling of absolute goodness. This is a really, really sweet feeling. And then then when there's vijja, it's a recognition that this is just a feeling. And similarly, when it's something painful, like you've got some physical illness, or you've got your fourth day of non-stop diarrhea, and you're living in a storeroom that 18 people are coming to every hour. This is really exactly what I wouldn't like. If I'm going to be sick, I just want to be by myself, and here I am stuck in a storeroom with visitors who don't want to have me here. And then it's recognizing, this is really unpleasant. This is exactly the kind of thing that I dislike. Then it's still unpleasant, but there's a recognition that it's a flow of perception. It's not a solid and absolute thing, that's not an absolute value. So even though that uncomfortable and bitter taste is still there, there's that spaciousness around it. There's the emptiness. It's like, and that's why in the Sutta Nipata were the questions of Moggaraja. If you see Moggaraja, you see the world as empty, then the king of death will not find you. And it's just that same reflection. It's like if you see, this is just a feeling, it's a really intense feeling of excitement or fear or misery, but as long as we see, this is a real big one. But just that which can see, this is just a feeling, how could it have any solidity, really? Then the king of death's got nothing to get hold of. Anyway, that's my perspective.
I had a story at this conference they had about China in the West when you were talking about your experience with China. One time I remember you saying that you went on a Nimon meeting, I think, to Thailand somewhere, and there was like a kind of crazy man, some man who's kind of really aggressive himself in China. Didn't react in any way and really studied the great impression. Can you talk about this thing? Like what way is it?
It was the day after my bhikkhu ordination. So I've been at Bapong, and in those days Lumpur would do a whole string of ordinations in the evening. He'd usually start in the evening, sometimes quite late in the evening, and then do a whole batch of people. So, and then the Frongs would always be ordained last. I don't know if that's still the system. But there was about 20 or 30 people that were ordained that night, and then myself and Ajahn Gambhiro, who lives in Taiwan. we were the last ones. So it finished quite late at night. So we stayed at Bapong. Kambira was living here, living at Bapong, and I was here. But I stayed over at Bapong that night with Ajahn Pabakro, and then the next day my name was on the list to go to a Nimon in Bangkok, in Luang Por's home village. And there's quite a lot of monks there, maybe like 11 or 13 monks, and there was a few of the newly ordained ones from the night before went along. And it was in a house in Bangkok. And so we're all sitting there, Luang Por's at the head of the line, sitting in this house. And while the food is being offered and being passed down, then this villager from Bangkok, I presume it was one of the villagers, but this looked like local man, was talking to Luang Por and this kind of getting this constant stream of very loud, sort of seemingly opinionated verbiage, not letting Luang Por get a word in edgeways, and everyone else is sort of sitting around just kind of choi and going on and on and on and on. All the food had been passed down, and we're sort of sitting there, and he's just going on and on and on and not stopping. And then I think what happened was then that Luang Por gave the finally he kind of paused for a bit, and then Luang Por gave the anumodana, and then we started eating, and then the guy started talking again. And we're all sitting there eating, and he's going on and on and on, and my mind was going, doesn't that man know how disrespectful he's being, and that Luang Por should do something, and why doesn't he just sort of tell him to keep quiet, and can't he see that everyone else is just sort of looking at the floor, and everyone else is really upset, and that this is supposed to be a special occasion for these other people, and it's not his house, going on and on. And Luang Por was just completely unflustered and was just eating his food or just looking at the fellow and listening to him. And then during the course of the meal, I kept seeing my mind filled with this sort of righteous indignation. Me, sort of the most, newly ordained monk, most junior of the whole group, and getting all opinionated and upset. I could see I was, in those days the food was generally pretty simple, and then going to a nimon to somebody's house was an opportunity for some much more broad range of flavours and food things, and so normally I would have been quite taken up by that, but my mind was so caught up in this critical arom about being upset by this person being so loud and so rude and just not being respectful to Luang Por. But I kept noticing when I looked at Luang Por, he wasn't just sort of waiting for the moment when the guy was going to pause so he could just jump in and say, Poor Boon, why don't you shut up and go and sit with the others. Or, he wasn't waiting for a break. He wasn't going to launch into anything. And the more I looked at Luang Por, and I sort of glanced up and looked at him, the more I could see he's absolutely unbothered by this. To him, this is completely not a problem. And then I also, as it got towards the end of the meal, I looked up and I saw the other people say, well, of course everyone here knows him. And maybe he's probably been like this for the last 50 years, and everyone knows. He's always like that. But they're used to it. And it was seeing my own kind of impression or my own indignation. So, well, the only person here who's got a problem about this is me. So it was like that kind of contrast of, it was a powerful lesson in seeing that Luang Por had the capacity to not make a problem out of it, where my mind would say, well, no, the problem is that guy and his behavior. And what really came across was that Luang Por is not making a problem out of it, therefore it's not a problem. And it's just my own, if I'm upset or suffering because of it, it's only my mind's creation. It's not coming from out there. The problem is coming from inside. So it was a powerful lesson in that respect, and that also seeing how someone in the role of leadership, or who's in the sort a position of authority, that they don't always have to control everything. Because that sense of, he's in charge, he's the boss, he's supposed to keep things orderly, and that person shouldn't be acting that way, and the leader should be keeping everything tidy and proper and appropriate, and he's not doing that. And then realizing, oh, well, maybe he's leading things according to a system that, you know, I'm not recognizing, and that actually he's handling the situation in the most appropriate and the best way possible. So that it was also revealing to me about the way that I assumed that someone is sort of leads or is in charge of a situation. Sometimes the best thing to do is just leave it alone and not feel like you have to interfere or make everything fit a prearranged pattern, because it's not like Luang Por would have particularly wanted that or invited that fellow along. But it was just that his own patience and accommodating attitude then was a very direct expression of Dhamma. Is there a particular reason why you asked about that?
Just one thing I know that I heard you say that.
It was in Bangkok.
Ajahn, one time I was listening to a talk that you were giving about nirvana at, I think it was like Spirit Rock a few years ago. And you were mentioning when you lived in Thailand and then you moved to England, and it was like, you said, I seem to remember, like you had some kind of shift, and you kind of was like, now I kind of like understand what the practice is about. Do you remember like saying something along those lines?
Probably. I think there's a few reasons why I might have said that, but I think part of it was because when I lived here, Ajahn Pabakaro was the abbot at Wat Nanachart, and he was a great handyman. You know, he made the first rattan bowl stand. I made the second one. And he was very good at building things and fixing things, but he was not very comfortable. He was very good at giving Dhamma teachings in Thai, but he was not very comfortable teaching in English very much. And so there wasn't very much in the way of Dhamma instruction when I was here at Nanachart. And then when I went to Wat Pah Pong, I was here for about 15 months, and I went to Wat Pah Pong, and Luang Por was away in England, so there was just like very little in the way of Dhamma teaching at Wat Pah Pong that I could understand. And then I went to Royat for my first rains retreat, and Ajahn Rongrit would give 1 6-hour Dhamma talk a week on the Wanpra. He would talk from 6 o'clock to midnight on the Wanpra. And that was the Dhamma instruction for the week. But he was doing a lot, and it was his home village, so there was a lot of kind of Koigan with the so woven into the village politics and family life and everything woven into the Dhamma talks, and I really couldn't catch a lot of it. So that during that time I had tremendous faith in Dhamma and in the bhikkhu life, but I hadn't really, and I wasn't really conscious of this, but I hadn't really got a lot in the way of instruction, and also like a framework for practice. And I didn't really have a clear sense of that. So I was really running on faith and commitment and endurance a lot. And then when I went to England, and also one of the things that here was that everyone was talking about the, like say, Vinaya training or methods of meditation, but no one ever talked about Nibbana or talked about the goal of the holy life. And then when I went to England, and Luang Por Sumedho was there at Chithurst, he would give a couple of Dhamma talks a day, like every morning, kind of morning reflection every day, and pretty much a Dhamma talk every evening. You remember? It was very, very much the glory days, and sometimes, you know, there'd be like another Dhamma talk thrown in at tea time. So like often like 2 or 3 Dhamma talks a day, with Luang Por Sumedho, only about 20, 25 of us living there, and it was an incredible time. And but I noticed that he would talk about nirvana or ultimate reality and the unconditioned and so forth all the time. Yeah, every Dhamma talk, pretty much, that element was in it. And so it gave a real context for, oh, that's why we keep the Vinaya, or that's why we're trying to use these meditation techniques. It gave a basic framework of the goal. And so it was one of the few times I ever actually asked Luang Por Sumedho a sort of straight Dhamma question. I mean, he provided the answers of his own in most things in the flow of his teachings generally. But that was one question I did ask him directly. I said, you know, when I was in Thailand, hardly ever did I hear a single word about Nibbana or about ultimate truth or these the qualities of liberation or transcendence. But here, you talk about it all the time. So how come? And he said, well, I realize that here in the West, the people have a lot of interest in Buddhism, but mostly the Buddhists here have turned their backs on Christianity and theistic religion. And they don't like the idea of a personal God and a creator. But then they tend to look at Buddhism as a kind of psychological technique, and that there's a kind of aridity that comes with that they have no sense of the way the Buddhism had developed in Britain since the 1880s. There was a kind of aridity in there, that it was seen as an explanation for the human condition and a good way of understanding life and a good way of calming the mind. But he said that there's no real sense of the transcendent or ultimate reality, because they kind of pushed aside the God idea. But then the mind has tended to focus just on the conditioned realm and sort of straightening out the conditioned realm. So he said the reason why I talk about Nibbana and the unconditioned a lot is because to help support the quality of faith, that there is something beyond the 5 khandhas. So in Asia, that in a way that's so woven into the whole context of Dhamma life. That's so much of there in the understanding of Dhamma and the way that that's been embodied and lived over many, many centuries. And so there's a huge basis for faith, and a basis for devotion to the practice, devotion to Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. He said in Britain there's not much of that sense. So he said that in order to help people cultivate more of a sense of what it's all for, or what the broader context is, and the genuine possibility of liberation. So that's why I talk about it all the time. And so that made a huge amount of sense to me, and I could feel this sort of, because hearing him talk in that way was I felt that already, oh yeah, now I get it. Because as a kid, as a teenager, I thought about trying to understand the nature of God and what is ultimate truth and what's reality. I thought about that a lot and tried to figure that out. And then when I came here to Wat Nanachat was here in Thailand, I initially had a strong sense of what it was all about. It's all about being in a way recognizing that ultimate truth, but then it was just not talked about, or the focus was on how to keep your sabong straight, or not make a noise dropping your noina seeds in your spittoon, and, how to pour water without rattling your kettle, or how to sit without moving for as many hours as possible, which is all good and important things, but the Nibbana Dhatu was kind of being left out of the picture. So that was one of the main reasons that Luang Por Sumedho was so incredibly skilled at introducing pointing to that dimension of practice, and also expounding and embodying the way that you use learning how not to rattle your kettle and how to straight sabong, how that fits together with that realization of ultimate truth, and that the basis of faith is not just trying to be a good Buddhist, as sort of straightening out, having the form kind of perfected, or the understanding the ideas all neatly lined up. But there's the whole point of it is that the actuality of liberation. So then I found because I had a lot of commitment and faith, but my practice in a way had hit a bit of a brick wall, and then coming into contact with that teaching, I was like, oh right, okay, and then that gave it more of a focus, and it was really a lot to do with just not having the advice or guidance in a language I could understand. Yeah, maybe Ajahn Rumrit or Ilong Po Liam or the others who were giving talks at Bapong, maybe they were saying that, but I just didn't have the language to pick any of that up, and it just seemed to be kind of missing. And that's also one of the reasons why Ajahn Pasana and I did this Nibbana tome, this book, and was so that those teachings on Nibbana, ultimate truth, they're freely available and sort of highlighted and say, look, this is what we're doing this for, and that this is the goal is this, the realization of this potential for us. So I wasn't aiming to be critical of things in Thailand, but also the real things there in the West. But it was just the chemistry of my own particular situation, and also I don't mean to criticize. Ajahn Prabhakara was a great teacher, and he was one of the reasons that I stayed, because he was such a wonderful kind of Dhamma mentor and father figure. So it's kind of strange now to be, he's the layman and I'm the terror. But I was extremely grateful to him, and he was a wonderful teacher in many ways. He really did teach me how not to make noise with the noinar seeds, how to tie the strings on my bowl cover, and that he was a wonderful Dhamma teacher and friend, but explaining Asankata Dhamma was not his thing. He also did invent the rattan bowl stand. So he's left his legacy all over Thailand.
What were they done off before? What were they done of?
Just bamboo, but they never used rattan.
Oh, for this kind of...
For the weaving around the edges and around the center. He was the first one to do that.
It's a wide style that they do what one that's attributed to him.
He was the first one. And the one I made took me about 3 months to make. And I was so attached to it that when the abbot of I was down in Bangkok for something shortly after my bhikkhu ordination, and Ajahn Tui was the abbot of the Ayutthaya monastery in those days, so he had about 25 pansa, and he saw my bowl stand and said, "Oh, sway mak mak, call me," and he asked me for it, and I said no, which I didn't realize quite how outrageous that was at the time, but there was just no way could I let go of it at that point. It was my beautiful Deen Bhat, but I had to let go of it eventually because it went up in flames. I was staying in a caravan in Devon, the Pansar of 1981. I was sent off to be but myself and one Pakao, one Anagarika in Devon, before the Devon Vihara existed. And there was a little group down there, and they invited other monks to go and be there for periods. And so I think Ajahn Viradhamma had been the year before. So I went down there, and I was out on Bindabat in the morning. I left the bowl stand and my things in the caravan, and then somehow or other the caravan caught fire while I was on Bindabat. There was maybe an electrical, the there was a tape recorder that was left plugged in but switched off. Or maybe there was a coal from the wood fire had caught something. But anyway, as I came back from Bindabat, the caravan and the world's most beautiful bowl stand were just this roaring inferno. Everything I owned was third day of the Pansa. So it was perfect in its impermanence as well as its beauty.
You have all your 3 robes.
Yeah.
I was curious about, I heard somebody telling that you went to a certain Egyptian monastery, the Desert Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot about these kind of things. What did they actually look like, and what did they teach?
These Coptic monasteries. In the western desert in Egypt, say between Cairo and Alexandria, there's an area of desert there. It's called the Western Desert, and there's a number of monasteries there that were founded a long, long time ago. So we visited 3 of those with Lumpur Sameto, and so some of them were established 1700, 1700 years ago, back in the 4th century, 5th century. Some of them, they still have many things, they've still got the Dhamma seat, from the 7th century, the wooden Dhamma seat in the pulpit that's still there. And so they're not just the same locations, they're the same buildings and same furniture. It's been there for more than 1,500 years. And so it's really quite extraordinary. The Coptic monasteries the Coptic Christians were there before Islam existed. So before Muhammad was even born. So it's pre-Islam, and they've survived a lot, not just from the sort of Islamic attacks from Islam, sort of Islamic groups over the years, but also just local tribes and raiders, and so they have a very defensive attitude. So the monasteries are a bit like fortresses. They have these huge walls around them, and they have these towers where the monks could hide out in under siege, and with a well down in the middle of the tower, so they can get water. They can be locked up in these towers and protected from the raiders. So they've got a bit of a defensive attitude. but it's quite incredible. If you imagine just staying alive as a community, as a continuous living community for 1,700 years, surrounded by oppressive forces, you've got to have some serious dangjai, resolution and fortitude. So there's the monasteries are a bit of a strange mixture of being like a spiritual community and also a kind of battleground and fortress. And then the way they relate to their faith is also similar. They were quite polite and friendly to us, but there was really clear that religious dialogue was not. There was, in all the places we visited, they were very polite and showed us around, but there was not much. So what do you Buddhists believe in? Basically we're godless heathens, and we're probably almost certainly in the grip of Satan, because we're not Copts.
There wasn't any kind of resonance in terms of samana sanya?
No, it was really interesting that there were people. They were kind of polite and genuinely friendly as they showed us around. But even within their own groups, it's like one of them. Most of them spoke quite good English, because nowadays most of the Coptic monks are professionals. So there was, say, at the Anba Bishoy monastery, there was, I think, something like 70 or 80 monks, and they had 14 engineers, 5 medical doctors, 3 or 4 ophthalmologists, 5 architects. They're professionals who've left their professional lives and become monks. And back in the early 70s, late 60s, they said like that monastery Ando Bishoy, they had like 6 old monks. The last, they were all kind of decrepit 80-year-old. And then something happened, and then suddenly a whole new generation started showing up, and they're bursting at the seams, their monasteries. So one of the things that was interesting was that they were kind of polite and accommodating, but there was absolutely no interest in who we were or what we did, until we chanted. They were showing us around, and then one of the lay people that was with us said, could you recite some of your verses or the liturgy that you do? And so the monk was like, oh, really? You want me to do that? So he recited this thing, and they use the ancient Coptic language, which is, and it's got a lot of resonances from ancient Egyptian. So many of the words that they use are very like you find in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And Ajahn Vimala can speak ancient Egyptian and read hieroglyphics too. So he can't do very well in English, but he's not very good with English, but he's great with reading Egyptian. So he did this chanting. It was very beautiful. The Christian monk who was showing us around, the Coptic monk. And they have this extraordinary kind of headgear, like a sort of a black cowl with stars sewn into it. And so then he had finished this chant that he did, and so then and they spoke very good English, and so then the conversation went on, and then one of the other lay people with us said, "Oh, Ajahn, well, this church has been here so long. Would you like to do? Do you think it'd be okay if you did some chanting here as well?" And we sort of looked at the monks and said, "Well, would that be all right?" He said, "Okay." Just sort of utterly uninterested, and just okay. Well, if they must. And then we started chanting in Pali. And you could, I had my eyes closed at first, but the lay people who were watching him said he was just kind of like, and then we started chanting together, and Ajahn Sameto, and Ajahn Yanarato, Ajahn Vimala, and myself, and they were he was kind of like bored, and like, and then we started, and then suddenly, and they said it was quite the most extraordinary transformation, because he'd been they're big compounds. There's a lot of buildings. So he'd been with us for like 20 minutes or half an hour, showing us around, and so we'd been together for a while. And then as we started chanting, they said, "Oh," and you could see it was almost like he suddenly realized, "Oh, these are monks. These actually are monks. They haven't got beards, but they're monks." And it was not like he could understand the Pali, but there was something of the voices coming together and then reciting. Something in him, very basic, recognized that. So after that, he was, "Oh, please," he was a whole different kind of Aramana was there. And then when we were just about to leave, and then some of the lay people said, "Well, could we take a picture of you together?" He says, "Yes." Normally we don't allow pictures. And Ajahn Vimala, who'd been there more than 20 years ago, he said when he asked the monk whether he could take his picture, he said, "We don't allow photographs of dead people." Because when they're ordained, they take that as their death. They die from the world. And so we don't allow taking pictures of corpses. Like their own body, they see themselves as dead to the world. They've died. They've cut the line to the world. And so he said, "Yes." To Ajahn Vimala's great surprise, he says, "Yes, this is a historical moment." And he kind of lined up, and he was just... So that was very kind of wonderful. But it was the Pali chanting that he recognized, and there was a connection there. But also when we were asking about their belief system or what their particular order was based on, he said, "We are Neophysites, not Monophysites." Yeah. we believe in one God that is perfectly manifested as Jesus Christ, the human and divine natures perfectly fused, not unified. And you realize, whoa, okay, Mayaphysites, not monophysites. So it's like, we're Dhamma, we're not Mahanikaya. And it was, and to them it was like obviously this huge deal. Like, don't think for a moment that we're those monophysites. And it's like the other monastery across the other side of the oasis. Those people, those monks who are monophysites. The centuries-old sparring. Like those guys, literally the other side of the oasis. Who are those monophysites. Terrible wrong view. But it was kind of sweet. And also you got the feeling that maybe they were more at ease talking with the Buddhists than they were with those heretical monophysites, who I guess do believe in the human and divine nature, both fused and unified. So the idea that you don't believe that Jesus is anything special at all is just, you're so far off the edge of the map that you're okay. It was also really interesting being at these. If you're ever waiting for Wat Prananachart to be finished, forget it. I mean, these monasteries, so they've been going for like 1700 years. The work's not finished. There's still construction going on. Renovations, repairs, construction, still fixing the roof. Got some finishing touches to do to the lay people's accommodation. 1700 years and you're not finished. So don't wait for Nanachart to be done. Not that that's depressing. I'm not trying to be depressing. If you're waiting for it all to be over, it's going to be a long, long wait. So you have to finish it every day. Paul?
Yes. Or like maybe is there any? Yeah. Thank you very much. Babayang Amaro
So do you have